It was a rainy Friday when Eduardo Mendes arrived at Palazzo Dorato, the most exclusive restaurant in São Paulo. At 45, he had built a real estate empire from scratch, but success had hardened his heart in ways he didn't fully understand yet. That night, Eduardo had no idea he would meet someone who would forever change his perspective. Someone his own prejudice would initially prevent him from recognizing. At the restaurant's entrance, a 38-year-old black woman named Sandra was waiting under the awning, trying to shield herself from the torrential rain. Her simple clothes were soaked, her hair plastered to her face. She clutched a plastic bag with both hands, shivering from the cold. Eduardo walked right past her without so much as a glance, his designer clothes and expensive umbrella protecting him perfectly from the elements. To him, people like Sandra were just part of the urban landscape, unseen and irrelevant, but Sandra wasn't there by chance. She had a very specific reason to be in that place on that exact night, a reason Eduardo would soon discover. Inside the restaurant, Eduardo settled into his reserved table, the best in the house. He was waiting for his 16-year-old son, Miguel, for an important dinner. He wanted to talk about the boy's future, about the family business, about how he should behave in society. As he waited, Eduardo noticed through the window that the woman was still outside, now visibly desperate. The rain had intensified, and she was frantically searching for shelter. What a deplorable situation, Eduardo muttered to himself. What is someone like that doing in this neighborhood? Sandra, in fact, had worked as a cleaning lady in those wealthy homes for over 15 years. She knew every street, every family, every story, but that day, she wasn't there as an employee. She was there as a desperate mother. Finally, Sandra decided to enter the restaurant. She knew she didn't have money to buy anything, but the rain was becoming unbearable. She just needed a few minutes of shelter. When Sandra crossed the doors of Palazzo Dorato, her old sneakers splashing water on the Italian marble, the restaurant fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Well-dressed clients whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. The maitre d' Giuseppe immediately approached her with a look of total disapproval. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this is a fine dining establishment. We have a dress code that must be respected." Sandra lowered her head, ashamed. "I know, sir. I just wanted to get out of the rain for a few minutes. I won't bother anyone." But Eduardo, watching the scene from his table, was outraged. He summoned Giuseppe with a commanding gesture. "Giuseppe, what kind of place are you running here? Letting anyone just walk in? This is unacceptable." Giuseppe nodded quickly. "You're right, Mr. Mendes. I'll take care of it immediately." Eduardo stood up from his chair, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is exactly the degradation happening in our city. People who don't know their place invading spaces that don't belong to them." Sandra looked up at Eduardo, and for a second, something passed between them. A flash of recognition that Eduardo couldn't identify. But his anger was stronger than any other feeling. "Miss," Eduardo said, pointing to the door, "you're clearly in the wrong place. This restaurant is for people who can afford it. I suggest you find somewhere more suited to your standards." Tears started to well up in Sandra's eyes. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was the cruel irony of the situation that Eduardo couldn't see. "Please, sir," Sandra said softly, "I just need a few minutes. I promise I won't bother anyone." "You're already a bother," Eduardo snapped back. "Giuseppe, call security. I want this person removed immediately." But at that moment, the restaurant door opened again, and Miguel Mendes burst in, completely drenched from the rain. The 16-year-old quickly scanned the room until he spotted his father. "Dad!" "Sorry I'm late." The traffic was terrible, and Miguel stopped mid-sentence when he saw Sandra, and then something happened that no one expected. "Sandra!" Miguel shouted, running towards the woman with a huge smile on his face. Eduardo was frozen in shock as he watched his son hug this woman with a joy and affection he rarely saw in the boy. "Miguel! My boy!" Sandra exclaimed, hugging him back with tears of joy. "You've grown so much. I can hardly believe it." Eduardo felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. His son knew this woman. How was that possible? "Sandra, what are you doing here?" Miguel asked, concern clear, as he noticed her wet clothes and sad expression. I came to look for you, Miguel. I really needed to talk to you." That's when Eduardo approached, utterly confused and with a growing sense that he had made a terrible mistake. "Miguel," Eduardo said, his voice trembling. You know this lady?" Miguel looked at his father with an expression of deep disappointment. "Dad, this is Sandra, the woman who practically raised me when you were always traveling for work." Eduardo's world collapsed in that moment. Sandra had been Miguel's nanny from age 2 to 12. For a decade, she was the one who woke up at night when he had nightmares, the one who took him to the doctor when Eduardo was in meetings, the one who helped with homework, who comforted him when he cried, who celebrated his little victories. "You remember, Dad," Miguel continued, his voice filled with emotion. "Sandra was there when you weren't, which was almost always." Eduardo felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. He remembered Sandra, of course, but she had always been just the nanny to him, an employee, someone he paid to take care of his son while he built his empire. "Sandra," Eduardo whispered, finally recognizing the woman who had devoted 10 years of her life to caring for Miguel as if he were her own son. "Hello, Mr. Eduardo," Sandra said softly, wiping away her tears. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I didn't know you were dining here." Miguel gently held Sandra's hand. "Sandra, what happened? Why were you looking for me?" Sandra took a deep breath, gathering the courage to tell the truth. "Miguel, my son Daniel is in the hospital. He's 14 now. Do you remember him? You two used to play together when I brought him to the house sometimes." Miguel nodded quickly. "Of course I remember. Daniel, how is he?" "He needs urgent heart surgery. It costs 80,000 reais, and I've tried everything. I've taken out loans. I've sold everything I had. I came here because you're like a son to me, and I didn't know who else to turn to." Eduardo heard every word as if it were a knife to his heart. While he had publicly humiliated Sandra, she was desperate to save her son's life. "Dad," Miguel said, looking straight at Eduardo, "we have to help Sandra. She cared for me like no one else ever did." The entire restaurant was watching the scene in absolute silence. Eduardo realized that everyone was witnessing not just his cruelty, but also his complete failure to recognize someone who had been essential in his son's life. "Sandra," Eduardo said, his voice breaking, I didn't know. I didn't recognize." "There's no need to explain, Mr. Eduardo," Sandra replied, with a dignity that made Eduardo feel even more ashamed. "I know my place." "No!" Miguel exploded, his voice echoing through the restaurant. "You don't know your place, Sandra. Your place is in our family. Your place is to be respected for what you did for me." Eduardo began to cry, tears of shame, regret, and overdue recognition. For 10 years, he had entrusted the most precious thing in his life to Sandra. And now, when she needed him most, he had treated her like trash. "Giuseppe," Eduardo called to the maître, "bring the best table in the restaurant for Sandra, and prepare the finest dinner you have." "No, Mr. Eduardo," Sandra said kindly. "You don't have to do this. I just came to ask for help for Daniel." Eduardo knelt in front of Sandra, in the middle of the restaurant packed with São Paulo's elite. "Sandra, forgive me. Forgive me for not recognizing you. Forgive me for treating you this way. Forgive me for forgetting everything you did for my son." The restaurant's patrons were utterly shocked. Eduardo Mendes, one of São Paulo's most powerful men, was kneeling, asking forgiveness from a woman he had tried to throw out minutes before. "Mr. Eduardo, please stand up," Sandra said, gently touching his shoulder. "You don't have to humiliate yourself like this." "Yes, I do," Eduardo replied, still on his knees. "Because that's exactly what I did to you. I humiliated you. I treated you as if you were nothing, when in fact you were everything to my son when I couldn't be." Miguel was crying too, seeing his father finally acknowledge Sandra's worth. Eduardo stood up and grabbed his phone. "Sandra, I'm calling the best pediatric cardiologist in the country. Daniel will have the best surgery, in the best hospital, with the best doctors. And I'll pay every cent, Mr. Eduardo. I can't accept that." "You can and you will," Eduardo interrupted. "This isn't charity, Sandra. It's a debt I should have recognized a long time ago." That night, Eduardo canceled all his appointments. He took Sandra to the hospital where Daniel was admitted. When Eduardo saw the 14-year-old boy, thin and pale in the hospital bed, he immediately remembered Miguel at that age. "Daniel," Eduardo said softly. "I'm Eduardo, Miguel's father. You're going to get better, I promise." Daniel smiled weakly. "Sandra's uncle Eduardo? She always talked about you and Miguel." Eduardo felt another stab in his heart. Even after everything, Sandra always spoke well of him to her son. Miguel weinte ebenfalls, während er sah, wie sein Vater endlich den Wert von Sandra erkannte. Eduardo stand schließlich auf und griff nach seinem Handy. "Sandra, ich werde den besten pädiatrischen Herzchirurgen des Landes anrufen. Daniel wird die beste Operation bekommen, im besten Krankenhaus, von den besten Ärzten. Und ich werde jeden Cent bezahlen. Señor Eduardo, das kann ich nicht annehmen." "Doch, du kannst und wirst es annehmen", unterbrach Eduardo sie. "Das ist keine Wohltätigkeit, Sandra. Es ist eine Schuld, die ich schon längst hätte begleichen müssen." An diesem Abend sagte Eduardo alle seine Termine ab. Er begleitete Sandra ins Krankenhaus, in dem Daniel lag. Als er den 14-jährigen Jungen sah, mager, blass, im Bett liegend, erinnerte er sich sofort an Miguel in diesem Alter. "Daniel", sagte Eduardo sanft. "Ich bin Eduardo, Miguels Vater. Du wirst wieder gesund, das verspreche ich." Daniel lächelte schwach. "Der Onkel Eduardo von Sandra? Sie hat immer von Ihnen und Miguel gesprochen." Eduardo spürte einen weiteren Stich ins Herz. Selbst nach allem sprach Sandra noch gut über ihn vor ihrem Sohn. Die Operation war ein voller Erfolg. Eduardo hatte die besten Spezialisten engagiert. Er sorgte für eine lebenslange medizinische Betreuung und finanzierte zusätzlich Daniels Ausbildung an einer Privatschule. Doch Eduardo ging noch weiter. Er bot Sandra eine leitende Stelle in einem seiner Unternehmen an. "Du hast eine emotionale Intelligenz, die meine Firma dringend braucht", sagte er. "Ich möchte, dass du die Personalabteilung leitest." Sandra akzeptierte, jedoch mit einer Bedingung. Sie wollte ein Stipendienprogramm für die Kinder von Hausangestellten einführen. "Damit andere Kinder wie Daniel Chancen bekommen, die ich nie hatte", erklärte sie. Miguel, der die gesamte Verwandlung seines Vaters miterlebt hatte, beschloss, Medizin zu studieren. "Sandra hat mir gezeigt, dass anderen zu helfen der edelste Zweck im Leben ist", sagte er. 6 Monate später organisierte Eduardo eine große Geburtstagsfeier für Miguel. Doch die Person, die er am meisten ehren wollte, war Sandra. "Sandra", begann Eduardo in seiner Rede vor allen Gästen, 10 Jahre lang warst du die Mutter, die mein Sohn brauchte, während ich zu beschäftigt war, Geschäftsmann zu sein. Heute möchte ich öffentlich anerkennen, dass du nicht nur eine Angestellte unserer Familie bist. Du bist unsere Familie." Sandra weinte vor Rührung. Neben ihr stand Daniel, inzwischen gesund und voller Leben. Eduardo fuhr fort: "In jener Nacht im Restaurant hätte ich beinahe den größten Fehler meines Lebens begangen. Ich hätte beinahe den Menschen hinausgeworfen, der meinem Sohn am meisten Liebe gegeben hat. Sandra hat mir beigebracht, dass Wert nicht durch Geld oder Aussehen gemessen wird, sondern durch Charakter." Das Unternehmen von Eduardo führte eines der fortschrittlichsten Diversity-Programme im Land ein. Sandra wurde zur Vizepräsidentin für Personalwesen ernannt, verantwortlich dafür, Talente unabhängig von sozialer Herkunft oder Hautfarbe einzustellen und zu fördern. Daniel wurde wieder Miguels bester Freund. Die beiden Jungen wuchsen wie Brüder auf. Eduardo lernte, inspiriert durch Sandras Beispiel, endlich der Vater zu sein, den er früher nicht gewesen war. 2 Jahre später wurde Sandra eingeladen, auf einem Unternehmerkongress einen Vortrag über soziale Inklusion zu halten. Eduardo saß im Publikum, stolz applaudierend. "Vor 2 Jahren", begann Sandra ihre Rede, "wollte mich ein sehr mächtiger Mann aus einem Restaurant hinauswerfen. weil er meinen Wert nach meinem Aussehen beurteilte. Heute ist dieser Mann mein Chef, mein Freund und jemand, den ich zutiefst respektiere. Sie sah Eduardo direkt an. Weil er den Mut hatte, seinen Fehler einzusehen und sich zu ändern. Er hat mir gezeigt, dass es niemals zu spät ist, ein besserer Mensch zu werden. Eduardo erhob sich mit Tränen in den Augen und die gesamte Zuhörerschaft spendete stehenden Applaus. Nach der Rede trat ein junger Unternehmer zu Eduardo. Wie haben Sie es geschafft, sich so sehr zu verändern? Ich gebe zu, ich habe auch meine Vorurteile. Eduardo antwortete, ich habe erkannt, dass meine Vorurteile mich daran gehindert haben, außergewöhnliche Menschen zu sehen. Sandra hat sich besser um meinen Sohn gekümmert, als ich es je tat. Sie verdiente meinen Respekt, nicht meine Verachtung. Miguel, nun Medizinstudent, erzählte oft seinen Kommilitonen, meine leibliche Mutter starb, als ich ein Baby war. Aber ich hatte 2 Mütter im Leben. Eine gab mir das Leben, die andere zeigte mir, wie man es mit Liebe lebt. Sandra ist meine zweite Mutter und mein Vater hat endlich gelernt, das zu sehen. Daniel, inzwischen 16 Jahre alt, gesund und fleißig, sagte oft, meine Mutter hat mir beigebracht, dass es egal ist, wie andere dich behandeln. Wichtig ist, wie du andere behandelst. Eduardo hat das gelernt und unser Leben verändert. Eduardo wandelte seine Vorstellung von Reichtum und Erfolg völlig. Er gründete eine Stiftung, die kostenlose Operationen für Kinder aus armen Familien finanzierte, in Erinnerung an Sandras Kampf, Daniel zu retten. Früher dachte ich, Erfolg bedeutet Geld anzuhäufen, erklärte Eduardo in einem Interview. Sandra hat mir gezeigt, dass Erfolg bedeutet, Menschen um sich zu haben, die sich um dich kümmern. Und das kann man nicht kaufen. Sandra wurde zu einer der angesehensten Managerinnen des Landes, Pionierin sozialer Inklusion. Doch sie sagte stets, ihre größte Errungenschaft sei es gewesen, 2 außergewöhnliche Söhne großzuziehen, Daniel, ihren leiblichen Sohn, und Miguel, ihren Sohn des Herzens. Ihre Geschichte wurde international zum Symbol dafür, wie Vorurteile durch Empathie überwunden, wie Stolz durch Demut besiegt werden kann und wie eine einfache Nanny einem Millionär den wahren Wert des Lebens lehren konnte. Eduardo ging weiterhin regelmäßig in den Palazzo Dorato. Doch jetzt lud er Sandra stets zum Essen ein. Der Maître Giuseppe empfing sie jedes Mal mit größtem Respekt und erinnerte sich an die Nacht, die ihr aller Leben verändert hatte. In jener regnerischen Nacht, erzählte Eduardo oft, hätte ich beinahe einen Engel aus meinem Leben verbannt. Sandra hat mir gezeigt, dass Gott manchmal Engel in Verkleidung schickt und nur reine Herzen sie erkennen. Miguel und Daniel waren inzwischen unzertrennlich, studierten gemeinsam Medizin und träumten davon, eine kostenlose Klinik für Kinder in Not zu eröffnen. Sie sagten stets, sie hätten von Sandra und Eduardo gelernt, dass Familie nicht durch Blut bestimmt wird, sondern durch Liebe. Und Sandra? Sie beendete ihre Vorträge immer mit demselben Satz: Es spielt keine Rolle, wie du behandelt wirst. Behandle andere mit Würde, denn du weißt nie, wann genau diese Person die Antwort auf dein Gebet sein könnte. Das ist eine Geschichte über Vorurteile und Erlösung, über eine Nanny, die einem Millionär den Wert der Liebe lehrte, und über einen Vater, der beinahe die Chance verpasst hätte, den Engel zu erkennen, der 10 Jahre lang für seinen Sohn da war. Vor allem aber ist es eine Geschichte über zweite Chancen und darüber, wie die Liebe einer Mutter, ob biologisch oder des Herzens, nicht nur Leben verändern, sondern ganze Generationen prägen kann. Denn am Ende erkannte Eduardo, der reichste Mensch ist nicht derjenige mit dem meisten Geld, sondern derjenige, den die meisten Menschen umarmen, wenn er es am dringendsten braucht. Und Sandra wusste das schon immer.